Hi there, and welcome to the Smart Business Buying Podcast. I'm your host, Kelly Rogers. In today's episode, we'll be exploring the evolving role of AI in procurement and how teams can get started on their own AI journeys. Joining us today is Pierre Mitchell, the main analyst behind the recently launched Spend Matters AI Leadership Guide for Procurement. We'll put a link to the guide in our show notes. In this guide, Spend Matters drew on direct feedback from 350 chief procurement officers and their own research to look at how AI-based tools are reshaping the industry. Pierre, it's great to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Kelly.
So to begin, could you briefly share what Spend Matters is about?
Sure. Yeah. Spend Matters is a tech analyst firm. We do research and advisory, and we focus on procurement and related areas, primarily certainly in procurement, but in related areas around supply chain and finance and anything that kind of touches procurement. And we focus on helping companies understand the impact of digital on their operations and making smart choices given the wealth of technology, overwhelming amount of technology that's out there to potentially help them.
Absolutely. Well, Amazon Business is incorporating, machine learning and generative AI into the buying experience for a lot of our business customers. For example, we found ways to make some of our search functionality more intuitive to better sort of anticipate the needs of a buyer. We're also working on refining some of our analytics capabilities to deliver more of these spend insights right back to the customer. But we know that across the procurement industry, businesses of all shapes and sizes are thinking about incorporating AI in different ways. So I was hoping you could give us an overview of maybe how AI has been used in the procurement industry so far.
Sure. I mean, AI is an old topic. I was doing some AI development work, literally like 30 years ago. A lot of the technology has radically changed since then. But if you look at what's kind of happening, within procurement organizations, a lot of times they're using AI that they just don't even see or realize is AI. Sometimes it's kind of an older form of AI. So, for example, the area around auto classification and helping kind of understand your messy spend data so that you can gather it all in one place, analyze it, make sense out of it, be able to kind of get, develop spend cubes, if you will, your spend by supplier, by cost center, and by category, so we can better kind of, manage it. So that's an area where there's a lot of more traditional AI, often called discriminative or non-generative AI. But a lot of that, is quite often behind the scenes that you don't even see, but it's creating value. What's happened though recently, obviously with Gen AI, is it's really taken AI to the next level, right? In terms of the adoption and consumerization around using things like large language model-based chatbots and co-pilots, and really people just starting to get familiar with some of the tools. They're starting to now get used within a procurement context formally and sometimes explicitly, but other times often still behind the scenes to maybe augment and build upon some of that other more traditional AI that I was talking about before.
Absolutely. And at Amazon Business, we're investing in a lot of those areas as well, really driven by our customer obsession and what our customers are doing. I'm hoping you could give us a better sense for sort of the different levels of sophistication of AI across the industry. Sometimes people perceive the procurement industry as maybe an industry that's maybe lagging on hot trends and staying up to date. So give us a sense for sort of the different levels of sophistication. Are people really jumping on some of these new technologies and trying new things?
Well, to your point, I would actually agree with you in terms of procurement has historically been somewhat of a lagging function and has not had a lot of investment, particularly around the digital space. And so, a lot of the real advancements are typically happening on the sell side and in the consumer space. So in B2B and procurement, quite often it is a bit of, it's lagging. However, the need has never been larger to, and greater to use AI to help manage all the complexity that's in the supply markets that in some senses is an even more challenging problem than, focusing on the customer. So it's kind of like that old quote about, Ginger Rogers and, Fred Astaire. It's like Ginger had to do what Fred did, but backwards and in high heels. And so kind of procurement is almost, in that world of having to constantly support what's happening with those who own the budgets in the business, but also, with the external customers as that gets passed back. And they have to, know what's happening in the supply market, know what's happening with costs and tariffs and all the market intelligence, around that and supply bases and all these things. It is very complex. So as we think about the level of sophistication, there's kind of two dimensions to it. One is there's a technical piece, right, which is we've gone from basic machine learning, as I was describing before, around that traditional AI, to more of the generative AI and using large language models to generate content and to support some of those use cases, as many organizations are starting to get into, and most everybody is familiar with, some of the chatbots that are out, ChatGPT, and just some of the different chatbots that are out there. But as we then move into then the agentic world, right, and how do we use agents that use generative AI to kind of help orchestrate various processes and do a lot of these tasks. That's kind of what's happening right now in terms of that technical sophistication of taking that generative AI and now baking it into more robust, scalable, complicated, more B2B processes. That's where the current focus is right now. But certainly there's a lot of just basic blocking and tackling. But on the business side, maybe the easiest way to just think about it is one, just our personal use of things like the chatbots that are out there and just understanding how they work and really pushing on them and using them in more and more complex scenarios to investigate supply markets and supply risks and categories and individual suppliers, right? And all these things, as well as internal issues. How do I develop a good procurement policy, right? All these kind of good things, just getting started, right? And then folks will then get into the pilot phase. They start adopting some of the enterprise level tools, some of them from their traditional tech and service providers. Sometimes they'll go more with startups and test in different test cases. They'll use different platforms that are out there. AWS is a platform, but really starting to kind of get into the more sophisticated and advanced use cases. And as that happens, that's when things kind of get a little more complicated because it depends on who you are. But generally you want to be working closely with IT to make sure that whatever you're doing is, let's just say there's full communication between procurement and IT. There should never be shadow procurement. There should never be shadow IT. So having that linkage is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And really flexing that leadership position of the procurement leaders is important. And, we collaborate with purchasing organizations of all sizes. So anything from a solopreneur all the way up to, very large multinational corporations. And so, we really deal with lots of different challenges for lots of different businesses at different levels. And we're seeing everyone do, kind of operate a little differently in this environment. So, kind of in your view, what are some of the major challenges that procurement leaders and teams are sort of facing today, and how can AI help address these?
Sure. I mean, if I had to summarize the challenges, it'd probably be the military term, which is, VUCA, which is, let me pick on the volatility and the complexity, the V and the C aspect of it. And basically it's, how are we dealing with the complexity that's happening out in the supply markets and with the rest of the business, just given what's happening in the, geopolitical, environment and tariffs and whatnot. But so there's that kind of outside in problem, as well as just how do we add more value to the business? How do we get more spend under management? How do we get broader business engagement and alignment? How do we start integrating with other functions to do kind of broader areas outside of just core source to pay? For example, around third-party risk management and sustainability and, et cetera. So there's a lot to do in terms of doing more with less, and AI is very helpful both on the efficiency side, right? So we can free ourselves up to do that through increasingly autonomous kind of automation, better decision support, better data and analytics, and really letting us do the things that are more strategic and more human, right? And let the AI do other tasks. And I think the big thing is making sure too that the use of AI is a net add, right? And that it's actually something that's not just some technology du jour, because it's not. It is actually foundational. I've been a tech analyst covering procurement for 25 years, over 25 years. And this is not just something like blockchain, which it's great, transaction registries and all that, but it is a fundamental sea change that is happening. But so it's tricky because AI itself is a complex area. There's a lot of different types of AI and technology types, and trying to manage that and reduce complexity, eliminate risk, infosec risk, eliminate hallucinations, all these things, costs. There are some things you have to kind of navigate, which is what we spend a lot of time with clients doing. But overall, it is a net add, and it's starting to really pay some dividends.
Yeah, and on that thread, I mean, thinking about procurement teams and sort of how things are evolving, what type of new training or maybe new skill sets do procurement leaders, need to be focused on sort of here as we get, sort of the next, stage of a lot of this technology?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is actually the people side of it, right? And so how do we kind of retool our skill sets, right? And how we actually adopt the technology, because quite often adoption has been one of the biggest challenges and why we continue to stay on spreadsheets and tools that are not necessarily optimal. So I think this whole area around AI in terms of using just, let's say, the chatbots and copilots is a good example, right? In terms of how do we start to just get familiar with some of the basic tools and really push them to their limit and really demonstrate value and get some mastery over them, and then kind of take it to the next level, right, in terms of being able to then add more and more competency. So it starts kind of almost personally, right, with personal responsibility and how we all choose to learn about this technology and get smart about it individually. You can take some online courses, free online courses. There's just no shortage of content, but it's really pushing yourself personally and then with your teams and your peers within your organization and across organizations to learn what different people are doing within the organization, within IT, within other functions, do some collaboration. And then kind of like procurement should help, stakeholders do, look to what's happening in the supply markets, and the technology is really disrupting a lot of these, supply markets, and use that to kind of bring that value and pick the right tool and technology for the job to kind of drive more value. And that means kind of leading by example. It means that procurement should actually be getting its own house in order, using AI internally with its own operations, and so that you'll be in a much better position to lead and certainly to then just collaborate with other functions that are also trying to, use AI in different ways, whether it's in, kind of shared services groups, or whether it's on the sell side or in broader supply chain, in finance, these types of things. So I think the talent side and the organizational side of this to really invest in people and for people to take accountability and responsibility for their own development to really learn this technology and apply it for their own benefit and personal benefit and job security, as well as to kind of help their stakeholders and the business.
Absolutely. I mean, I agree. There's so many different tools to use, and I think the information sharing among professionals is really important. So sharing what works, sharing best practices, developing new SOPs and things like that for new technologies. For procurement teams that are just kind of starting out, that haven't really done much, have maybe heard about some of these trends in the industry, where should they begin?
The core playbook is still valid, right? In terms of procurement is like, spend management, supply management. Spend is what you pay, supply, value is what you get. So it really still starts with stakeholders and spend and markets and your strategy and how you create value and performance targets and capabilities and your value chains, right? All of that still remains in place. However, the supply markets, first of all, are getting overhauled with AI having a huge impact. For example, professional services and outsourcing and things like this are getting much more digitized with agentic technology and things like that. Starting like simple and with your own, for example, use of some of the chatbots and co-pilots, right, and just being able to use them to be like in a category, a spend category you've never addressed before, or a new technique, that is our best practice, right? To learn more about it and to ask about how other companies have done it, and then start to really see how far the tools will take you. So for example, you can be like, all right, well, tell me what's a best practice for a category strategy. And then you can say, well, great, given what's most important there, develop a stakeholder questionnaire that I can use, bingo, great. Now I want to do this for some spend category like facilities management. Okay. Tell me about the facilities management market, right? Then tell me about how I want to come up with a category strategy that I developed before, apply that to facilities management, and then come up with a supplier engagement strategy for how I'm going to source and manage them based on my chosen strategy. it'll come up with that, right? So it's the limitation is no longer becoming the technology. The limitation is really becoming ourselves, right? And so starting with something like that and then being able to say, okay, now how do we apply some of this technology to build my own agent or to just start to use the tools better that have AI from my existing technology and service suppliers, and certainly telling them and being vocal about where you would like to have the AI, kind of help you, right? Help them help you, little Jerry Maguire there, right? So I think it's, that starting with, the basics and then kind of, getting into, as I was saying before, starting with, stakeholder satisfaction or spend insights or level of self-service, level of automation, the amount of time that we spend wrangling data versus really analyzing opportunities. So those types of metrics and opportunities are still valid. It's just really now using the AI to help you in some of these, key areas. So that might be around, you follow the areas where there's like the most potential for automation or touching stakeholders. So it could either be on the front end around, intake management and, kind of the front end of the engagement, or with supplier self-service, because suppliers are a huge, set of users, right? So the more in which you can apply AI and CRM like functionality over to, the suppliers that you're working with, so that they can do self-service, they can check on the status of their invoices, et cetera, and using AI to take their invoices in, auto extract them, take contracts, your own legacy contracts, see deep into them, pull out the key data, and then be able to act upon it, and have the data be able to then integrate to your ERP systems, your source to pay systems. These are kind of, where the use cases vary, but it's kind of where you want to apply the AI where it'll have the most impact. And that's going to be around complex data that you can kind of pull data out, then that you can summarize. It's outside in data like market intelligence. It's kind of data that's in documents, not just invoices, but like in contracts, pulling that key data out. And then actually helping it using AI and generative AI to help generate drafts of RFQs, of statements of work, contract, draft language, things to kind of just help you and augment, your work so that you can really elevate yourself up to the more, strategic activities around what is the best strategy for this, spend category or this supplier. So yes, a simple question. I kind of took it down a few different paths, but I think those are some of the pathways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think any way we can really remove some of those repetitive tasks or tasks that are prone to error, absolutely. I think all professionals would be on board with that. In your research, have you found any mental models or frameworks to really help procurement leaders decide where to focus their efforts? You talked a lot about metrics and really setting some goals behind those metrics. What type of framework should leaders be considering?
I think one thing what you can do is actually start with the area around agentic frameworks. So once you've kind of mastered large language models and chatbots, and actually building an agent is a useful skill, because within an agentic framework, what are you telling an agent to do, right? And so you're telling an agent, here's a goal that you have in mind. You have to do a certain thing. Here is the context and the data that you're working with. Here are the tools that you might need to actually, get this work done, et cetera. And then here's kind of like the processes and maybe the other agents that you might want to interact with to get the work done. So if you think about that, that's very similar to balanced scorecards, right? And so we need to know what are those goals, right? So we should always, know what is the outcome we're looking for. Agile development is a great area. So, work closely with IT, but that ability to develop things quickly and to build new capabilities quickly and to do that cross-functionally and to make incremental changes and to get adoption and make sure that sticks versus just big bang giant, mega projects is valuable. Business process management, or how do we model processes is ultimately going to determine the types of agents that you'll need to do different things. And then like the whole area around operating models. And operating models is really just like it's what ties people and tools to processes and metrics. So, as we start maybe pulling people out and putting an agent in or, et cetera, for certain processes, it's really understanding how that is going to happen. So getting your as is, your current state processes, and then as you start refining them and you start digitizing them, doing that kind of proactively and methodically, right? And as you do that, then you can kind of know the skills that are that you want to have humans possess versus what think about like Alexa, right? In kind of the Amazon world, when you get Alexa, you can hook it up to a series of skills to operate different things. And it's the same thing with kind of agents, right? That skill might be turning a purchase requisition into a PO or getting a confirmation back from a supplier or, whatever it is, right? So operating models and understanding the idea of that is an important framework because ultimately you want to evolve your operating model to become more digital, more self-service, and more efficient and effective. Ultimately, that's kind of what we're trying to do.
That's great. And you mentioned so many great metrics along the way to really track your success and to know if you're really focusing on the right things, which I think is great advice. If we look ahead a few years, look in our crystal balls, if AI adoption and procurement continues to grow and really pick up steam in all of these different areas, how do you see AI really transforming the procurement function altogether, sort of in a big picture way?
Yeah, well, I think one of the interesting things about procurement is that, there's certainly a lot of runway to improve just within your core sourcing and supplier management and your purchase to pay operations and doing that for all your segments of spend, your tail spend to your strategic spend to your operational spend, and just doing that well, right? But as procurement gets more evolved, and what you see in the more sophisticated organizations is that procurement is kind of now stepping into enterprise level processes. So this area around how do we do third-party management and third-party risk management, third-party onboarding, risk management from a supply chain standpoint, seeing risks out in not just my first tier suppliers, but second tier, third tier. How do we model our carbon footprint out in those tiers and do some more advanced sustainability work? These types of things, it becomes procurement in the business units and the functional partners, IT and finance, et cetera, working together to kind of develop enterprise level capabilities. And so, for example, working on the customer side and making sure that we're, supporting them and reacting faster, driving more revenue from them, doing early supplier collaboration to support product and service development. All these types of things are enterprise level mandates and imperatives where procurement should really be in the mix and be demonstrating competencies to be like, look, we already know how to do a lot of this orchestration work using AI for different spend categories. Let's take it a little further. And now let's say bring in, the InfoSec and the sustainability things and really start turning this into a enterprise level capability around spend and supply management is ultimately about, externalization, right? So a CPO should ultimately be a CEO, a chief externalization officer. How do we really take the power of these supply markets and harness them, especially with technology and AI, to bring them internally so that we can then bring more value to, our customers. So I think that's probably going to be the biggest thing is kind of expanding beyond the traditional kind of process silos of core source to pay and actually being able to now, getting to these broader use cases to drive more enterprise value.
And this really is a great recap in your Spend Matters piece. I'm just wondering, as we close up, what's one piece of advice or takeaway that you'd like to share that you haven't hit on yet?
I think I touched upon this, which was that biggest constraint is yourself and your thinking and not the technology. And it's a challenge for procurement because we've always learned too about, we need to kind of show that we, kind of know everything in a way, right? And you don't want to show weakness and actually having the humility to understand and having that, knowledge that this market is around AI and technology is like a market that impacts all other markets. And it is something that is complicated and you need to start just getting better educated on it. This is what I do for a living and I struggle to keep up with all of the latest advancements, with what's happening in AI, namely on the agentic front and areas around knowledge graphs and ontology, advanced semantic analysis, all this kind of stuff, right, that's happening. So we all have some personal responsibility to address that knowledge constraint that we have, so that, because the more in which we learn and do, the less fear there is of the unknown, because we've already we know what it is, and we've applied a lot of it, and we know what we want to do next, right? So, that eliminating that fear and actually kind of running to not the fire, but, to the opportunity, I think is really the exciting, piece of this. And the technology is shifting. I mean, it is, because there's a lot broader enterprise things that are happening, in terms of not just agentic, but just the whole technology architectures themselves are moving more towards platforms, moving away from just throwing applications at the problem. And now we have all this fragmented data. There's kind of new techniques that are kind of evolving. It is a wellspring of stuff to learn. So if you have mastered things around your core, sourcing and procurement, negotiations and change management and project management, Lean Six Sigma and Agile, that's great. This is the next domain of knowledge that you must master, because it's going to impact everything. So that is actually good news if you can actually go, run to that fire and use it as an opportunity to kind of, build something good for yourself and for your company.
It's great advice. And again, I encourage everyone to go out and read the Spend Matters piece for more information. I certainly learned a lot. And thank you, Pierre, for joining me and for sharing this research. And thank you all for tuning into the Smart Business Buying Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode and want to stay up to date, make sure you subscribe to wherever you tune in for your podcast. And if you want to learn more and read the full guide, visit amazonbusiness.com/podcast.